and I'm just going to stand up here and talk by myself. Can the rest of you guys come up? That'd be great. Y'all didn't get the same introduction, and I don't have it all. Like, these are the wonderful people. Langston, come on up. Casie, come on up. And Michael, come on up. Grab a seat. And you all have mics. Blaine sent me this title. I think it was Blaine. Was it you that originally sent it? Or somebody sent me this title, and I thought to myself at first when we got to this designing the future where innovation and creativity meets, and I tried to put my thinking to that, and I thought, I have no idea how we're going to approach this panel. So I don't know what we're about to talk about, and it's going to be a whirlwind of a time, except for as we have talked about this kind of concept. I've been walking around and talking to some of you about creativity and innovation. And what I described to some of you was I want to try to build a worldview, an understanding of how innovation, creativity meet or don't meet, or are combative with one another, or how there generates friction, and try to understand how do we build the future? How do we go from where we are today into whatever's next? And so what I'd like to do is start with just briefly, each one of you kind of introduce yourself, maybe a name, and then what's the most innovative thing you've built, so that they can understand who you are, and then we'll dive into some questions around this interesting topic. Langston, maybe we'll start with you.
All right, no pressure there. Hi, everybody. My name is Langston Johnson. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me and taking the time to listen to what we have to talk about today. Most innovative thing that I've had the privilege of being a part of building. I'm not going to say I built it, but a lot of stratification of processes in agriculture is where most of the work that I've done has been. Really just removing the time from when you get data to when a decision is made to make a change in your behavior. So I would say, if you need more specificity, we can get into that, but I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you all. Thank you for inviting me as well. I am Michael Todd. The most innovative thing that I've ever worked on, I'm going to talk about a project I worked at during code school. I went to a code school in Omaha, the first class of Omaha Code School back in 2014. My solo project was Unfound Sounds. So I put together a treasure hunt for vinyl records throughout the city of Omaha, and then later through Sioux Falls. And hopefully I'll just bring it back up again here in Fargo. I've kind of moved up I-29 as I've kind of lived. But yeah, just having that kind of creativity with creating a project that encourages people to discover their city, maybe talk to businesses around town, and find new music.
Hey, I'm Casie. I have been trying to think about an answer to this question all morning long, and I'm trying to think of what is the most innovating thing I've ever done, and I feel like it's a lot of it is a lot of the same CRUD app over and over again with a little bit of tweaks, but I think some of the most innovative stuff I've worked on is the things that really brings together research, design, and engineering, and especially thinking about the end user and accessibility, which unfortunately is still very innovative, where thinking about the end user and how they're going to use it, reducing clicks, and just making it as accessible and lowering the cognitive load has probably been some of my favorite things to work on. So yeah, I don't really have anything specific, but I really appreciate and enjoy those applications that really take into account how the person is going to use it in the end.
One of the things that we talked about or started at this morning when we were talking about a direction for this is that innovation and creativity, in some sense, requires big personalities. And throughout a lot of history, there have been people that have been immensely impactful in the world that we live in. And those people have been, in a sense, shunned or kicked out or said, that's not the conventional wisdom. We don't go that way. How have you, within your experiences, been able to look at people who say, oh, we shouldn't do that? They put on their the old gray beard sits back and says, "You whippersnapper, there's no way you're going to be able to do that." How do you buck up against the naysayers when you try to bring accessibility to the world, or you try to bring data rapidly into their hands? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, one. And I think it depends on where you value, what opinions you value, or who you espouse expertise to. You might think of like a traditional gardening practice, such as the Three Sisters method in agriculture, as something that was like, oh, it's a spiritual practice and it's about the balance of these plants. Well, it turns out that system is so circular and so intact that they were able to take Buffalo Bird Woman's gardening practices and use regolith from an asteroid to grow those crops in space. That's the transfer of indigenous knowledge since time immemorial into an implementation that allows you to get food in a vacuum. Like, oh, okay, well, maybe we didn't see that as expertise or technology. Some woman using a buffalo shoulder to work the earth. Doesn't that, like, so who do you espouse expertise to? I think that's where you should start, because maybe you're not looking. It's right literally in front of you.
Definitely, yeah. I like thinking about that diversity of thought idea. This kind of speaks to what Jess was talking about, where, yes, I think it's important to have somebody that is the leader, the enigmatic leader who can speak, be very passionate about something, but I think it's very important to have somebody who is the quiet, the introverted, those sorts of people. And what's most important is that you have the guardian who can make sure that the quiet voices get louder and the louder voices maybe sometimes get quieter.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my answers are probably going to be a lot of what Jessica talked about. I feel like exactly the same way. So I think when butted up against somebody who is saying no to you trying to push for creative or innovative ideas that maybe they're afraid of or haven't really tried before, I like to ask why. I like to just understand, like it's like the seek to understand. Instead of just seeing that and saying, they say, no, I don't want to give that a try. Instead of being like, well, they don't know what they're talking about. Like, this is the way of the future. There could be reasons why they're pushing up against this new way of trying something. And it's like, ask them more about why their answer is no, to understand where they're coming from and listen to them too, and not just continue to push and push and push your idea, but continue to listen to them to see how you can craft a solution together.
You're talking, if I may ascribe a word, let me put words in your mouth for a minute, and then you tell me if I'm wrong. So what I heard there summarized in a word is humility. Okay, so if humility is critical to this idea of innovation and meeting creativity, or designing the future, maybe, if we will, when I look back over history and look at the big names that we ascribe, I mean, think that Alexander the Great conquered the known world in a decade at 22. Okay, he started conquering the world very young. That takes a big personality. That takes a lot of ego, even in one sense, right? So how do you deal with those kinds of people who are, in one sense, doing this innovation and creativity thing while also being humble? How do you merge those two things together? What am I missing in order to bridge that gap? Help me understand that. Help them understand that.
I'm just going to put this in context of my work. So I previously worked for a product, and my role as a front-end developer, which I see as kind of like the bridge between design, product management, business, all these sorts of things, where you just have to, we had loud voices often, and somebody just needs to step in, kind of give context to all the different roles. At least this is the way of decision making that I believe in, is like, here is your side, here is your side. Can we talk about this in a way that we all have the same facts, we all have the same kind of base, and then go from there?
Yeah, I think making sure that you have a shared understanding, as you mentioned, just in the language and you know what the burden of proof is, again, for excellence, because you know you can't just throw out the whole playbook. Like, you got to have something to start with, but I think, again, it's understanding how do you build a culture in which iterative thinking and curiosity are not only the merit of what is success, but really like the burden of proof for are we even firing as a team? Like, and really like that in itself is where people can really get the yoke off of themselves of just whatever the traditional idea is, because without those traditional ideas, you're gonna hit your head on a lot of stuff that people have already hit their head on. So why not use the fact that being a human is all about standing on the accomplishments of those who have come before us? So again, who are we espousing as those who we should be learning from? Like, who are the active leaders in the space, and how can we help coalesce that knowledge in such a way that removes friction in a way that impacts the uptick of those innovations being translated into, you know, whatever the practice is. It could be a cultural practice, it could be a team practice, it could be changing your tech stack.
You're saying something there, which is there's this history of sorts, these people that have come before us that are great. What conventional wisdom have you three kind of leaned on? What critical ideas have you said, man, that is a good one. That's one that, for example, one that I think is really valuable in like just life. Spend less than you make, right? Like if you're just gonna go into debt over like really basic conventional wisdom that actually has a huge impact in life, right? If you just don't spend above your means. So grandma probably told us all of that, right? What kind of conventional wisdom, what grandpas do you listen to that have impacted and shaped your focus on designing the future specifically? Like, hey, you're trying to build something cool. What have you done? What have you leaned on?
I don't know who to credit this to, but I really like the progress over perfection, the iterative steps. I worked when I was working at Suna, which is an e-commerce startup with bases like in Minneapolis and Denver. I worked on a really successful team called Team Condor because we were all about efficiency, and I Googled, because we were looking for team names, I Googled, what's the most efficient animal? And number one is a human on a bicycle. The second one was Condor. And what we were originally tasked with doing was bug fixes, hot fixes, quick improvements, and so just moving as quickly as possible. We changed a little bit, but the big thing that we did was just like iterative improvements. Every single sprint, we were pushing something to production. We were the most productive team in the company. It was super fun. It was such a fun team to be on because we didn't get hung up. We understood the big picture, which was really helpful, but we were able to break that big picture down into really small bite-sized tasks, and every single sprint we were pushing something that was a small improvement. So I really appreciate the progress over perfection motto, and honestly, like a lot of times when I'm coding, in my head I'm just like, good enough. And I'm just like, hey, let's push it out there. Let's see how people react to it. And then if people dig it, we can make it better. We can make it more stable. We can like fix it. We can improve upon it. And if people aren't using it, if people don't like it, let's understand why. And either we'll pivot or we'll scrap it.
But one more hour and it would be so
one
much
more
perfect. Right?
Just give me one more day.
Yeah, I just need just a little bit more time, and then the whole world will be solved. You know, world hunger will be gone.
Next sprint.
Yeah, next sprint.
Like a ticket. We'll get to it next sprint.
Michael, have you leaned on any conventional wisdom or old wisdom that you're like, man, I need that in order to be creative and innovative?
I'd like to speak to the iterative nature of product design, kind of going off of what you were saying there, where the idea is basically that you are not holding yourself in a room for years and then releasing your product to the world. You are in constant communication with your users, with your clients perhaps, and trying to understand their perspectives. That's kind of just, and then in terms of like precepts, I would say like accessible design is good design is something that I try to keep true to, where accessibility is very important, but the overall thing is that being accessible is beneficial to all of your users. So that's kind of what I think about.
Yeah, I mean, great question. First off, like there's so many good idioms and just things that you can lean on out there that are helpful. But if you just talk about just traditional knowledge or just what is even there, like when I've challenged myself to think about like what is intelligence, I think it's really just connection to an axon and a dendrite, and okay, so you can multiply on that. So really, like, okay, the most connected people.
Hold on. You just said two words I don't know.
Axons and dendrites. Yeah, they're
okay.
they're
I might be the only one that doesn't know that word.
I'm happy to go back. Those are the names of the cells in your brain that are firing potassium and calcium and allowing those are the synapses that let thought happen.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you increase your neuroplasticity through others, through friends, or through empathy, whatever that looks like. But then I'm challenging myself now, okay, well, who are the most connected people? Who are the people who are connected to everything? And I'm thinking, like, well, I'm sitting on land of indigenous people who have been here for 15,000 years. What do they know? You're talking about grandmothers. The first school that I went to was Nokomis, and I found out that in Ojibwe, that's a connection of, like, waterways and tributaries, streams. It also means grandmother. It also means person who connects us through time. Like, whoa, okay, person who connects us through time, can I have some milk and cookies? Like that, you just put a whole nother weight on that person's information. So who are we looking to? I think like there is knowledge there. I think like the names of the plants or like the relationships that are found there, I think there's a lot of information that we could be taking and transferring into sustainable practices that we've seen work. And like innovation doesn't always come from the future. It's some sort of combination of like lagging indicators, ground truth, and the vision that we have. Like,
I think you're actually tapping into something there where I want to go, which is innovation is not always in the future. So I was talking with somebody right before this, and we were talking about women's clothing, which is probably not something you would expect me to talk about, which is women's clothing. I know nothing about it. I would never even dream about trying to buy my wife some piece of clothing. I would fail miserably, okay? But do you know that most women clothing do not have pockets? What kind of world is this? That is not progress. Okay, so if innovation isn't always in the future, and women's clothing has been completely distorted to not be able to carry anything, how do we identify? I'm positing a premise there, right? That maybe not all progress is innovative or creative, and actually it's regressive in some ways. So can you talk about discernment, identifying, right? Because we all have to make decisions. Today I chose to come down to Fargo and spend a wonderful day with you people. I could be home. I could be working on my business. I could be doing this. I could be doing that. How do we discern, to some extent, right and wrong about what we ought to do in terms of being creative and innovative in the world? There you go. Now let's talk for 20 more minutes. Because women's clothing stinks, apparently, and there's no pockets. How do we fix it?
It's so they can sell us purses.
There, those capitalists.
Yeah.
Oh.
Slow us down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that push and pull, I think, between having an ego and being open to other people. For instance, my two girls go to a daycare called Nokomis. And so, learning something about the history of a word like that is very impactful for me. And yeah, I have trouble personally about like showing ego, which is kind of strange. But I think it's important to have that push and pull of ego, being open, and yeah, introversion versus extroversion, all those sorts of things.
I think something that I do again is just ask why. Why are we doing this? I think especially
because we always have.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And another good thing I noticed, especially with working with just younger developers, even senior developers fall into this trap of wanting to like reinvent the wheel because it's really fun. Like, we love coding. It's fun to dig in and it's fun to solve a new problem, but has this problem already been solved? Can we reuse something that already has been tried and true? Are we able to bring in a package? Are we able to bring in a library to help us out with this? Why do we have to recreate it? Is it just because it's fun? Or is this really what's going to be best for the end user?
Okay, so there feels to be tension there. Am I the only one that senses the tension? Which is, okay, we can ask why and say, well, we shouldn't do things just because we've always done them that way. But there's also a sense in which Grandma has connected certain things for us that we maybe ought not destroy, or otherwise we're starting from, rebuilding the wheel. How do you discern which structures should stay and which ones shouldn't? I hate building auth systems. I'm done. I've done it like 20 times. I'm just sick of doing it.
Yes. Yeah.
But by golly, they all stink. Sorry.
Yeah. I think some healthy debate is a good place to start. Building up a space where you can have that psychological safety, where you can have that conversation going back and forth and saying, I think we should do this, and someone else saying, I think we should do that. And recognizing that you're not fighting for your position, you're fighting to find the right solution, and having that North Star guide you through all of those conversations, because it can be very easy to get very attached to the idea that you're pitching, but you have to be open to listening and recognizing that, hey, no, that actually sounds like a really good idea. Let's dig more into that.
Yeah, definitely. I love this idea, especially of coding, where you are adopting an infrastructure when you decide to go with a third-party plugin or something like that. I know students at EDA talk about this quite often, where should I use the CMS or should I build it myself? And there's always that push and pull. And when you're at a company, sometimes that decision's made for you, which is nice. But sometimes then that decision then trickles down to you, and you do not like what they decided upon. So, yeah, I just love that kind of train of thought.
Yeah, as you try to determine what pieces are going to be effective for your team going forward, I think this is where, leadership and the team, it's an open sort of environment where you're able to cast vision in a way that allows people to make decisions in real time that allow them to move towards that vision. Because really, what we are looking at here is we're kind of like a flock of birds. Do I necessarily need to know what's happening over there on the other side of the flock? I just need to know which two birds I'm following. And no matter what kind of weather pattern we come up against, I know I'm with these guys. And eventually, we're going to get back. So what is the vision, and how is that vision going to inform us? Because if we can see it, they were talking to one of the last Tahitian wayfinders, and they say, how do you get there, Moana? How do you do it? It's like, close your eyes. Can you see Tahiti? Well, then we can go there. So what is the vision, and what are we doing? What tech, what tools, what cultural practices are we implementing to help us make that vision into a reality? Because what we're doing is imagining futures. We're imagining them, and this is why you need accessibility and equitable distribution among your teams, because you need to imagine futures that are inclusive. Because we're all going to be here. I have a hat today that is satin lined, because I'm guessing they put some black people on a development team at Carhartt, and now everybody can get a hat that's not going to make your hair look like you just got shocked by a lightning bolt. You're doing your best Ben Franklin impersonation every time you take your hat off. So it's those types of what's the vision, and then how are we going to have a discussion about that and allow that vision to be challenged, and really not try to live in a culture of genius where there's just this one person who is the only, I'm Steve, finger on the pulse of the future. Throw that out. The lone wizard in the tower doesn't exist anymore. We're all here. This is what we think is possible. How can we challenge that in a way that is safe, in a way that encourages us to really dig into the teeth of why this decision was made? Because maybe we did it because there was a cost factor limitation or time, or we don't have that anymore. We now have resources to shore up this piece of technical debt that we stored up, and now we can pivot. But it's the constant questioning of that, and really just, in whatever those practices are, whatever your rhythm of business is it retros? Is it 101s? What is that? What's the mechanism for feedback? And how are you turning that feedback into results? I think we should be asking ourselves that constantly.
Jess, you talked on a number of things that you and I could probably talk for a long time, because we probably agree on many things. Psychological safety being one of them, in which to say you have to create an environment for people to fail 100%. how does that work when somebody's wrong? How do you create a psychologically safe place to be able to challenge ideas and do these things? But at the end of the day, they want to, I'll try and make it practical for the kind of context that we're in. They want to bring in a package that is too heavy, or they want to reinvent the package without just using what already exists. How do you create a psychologically safe place for that to occur, and yet still, like, the North Star is at a location, right? And we have to get there somehow. And if somebody's trying to take us in the opposite direction, how do you navigate that to try to arrive? Langston or Casie?
Go for it.
I'm just going to, one of the people that I didn't expect to get a really good nugget from out of TEDx was Josh Duhamel. He was like, I'm not worried about making a bad decision because it's all the decisions that you make after that. It's like, yeah, we chose the wrong software. Great. What decision did we make next? We now have a new lens. We now have new information so you shouldn't necessarily be too worried because you're going to have to make a series of bad decisions. Like anytime you look at like a tech breach or something, it's like not only did they not notice they were in there for 160 days, they didn't have any of this stuff partitioned in a way that was going to, so it was a series of bad decisions. So I think knowing that, we can say, hey, as long as we are nimble and critical and thinking about all of the different steps along the way, like, yeah, make bad decisions, break the eggs, whatever the euphemism is. It's time for some omelets. Just knowing, like, if we find shells in there, we're not going to send it out. Like, pull it back. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that kind of helps, like, reframing wrong. Like, it's not wrong. It just didn't work in that situation. And what do we learn from that, and what's going to inform us to move forward? And I love processes. I am probably one of the only developers that really enjoys processes, and that's probably why I became an engineering manager.
Yep, you are.
I love them.
I'm just kidding.
But I will utilize them to allow my team to explore. Research spikes are a great way to just, like, provide a safe space that says you have 3 days to, like, F around and find out, right? Like, just like you have 3 days to just, like, dig in, do whatever you want. Like, tell me what you found at the end. Help us decide how we're gonna move forward. And so I appreciate having that, like, built in, because that is also just, like, building in those expectations where it's like maybe you have fewer points done that sprint because you're investing up front in these research spikes. And it's all about just, like, continually communicating and letting people know where you're at, what you're finding, what the expectations are, and letting people understand what their boundaries are too. If I love working within, like, processes, I was like, tell me exactly what I'm allowed to do and, like, what my clear boundaries are, because I'm gonna just, like, bounce all over in there and figure out what we can do within these boundaries.
Yeah, that's a good representation of humility there, actually, which is to say, okay, it's okay for me to be constrained because the constraint actually orients me in a particular direction. There's something really important in that, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I love processes as well.
Wow, there's 2 people in this room. Watch out for lightning, seriously.
I come from a journalism background. That's what I got my degree in. So maybe that's what it is. Just over the years, there's been these established processes of feedback. Essentially, you have an editor, you have a copy editor, you have your publisher, you have editor-in-chief, like all these different layers of feedback that you have, and then you have this deadline that you have to make every single day. So I think it's about trying to translate that with coding, is, having those PR reviews, having them at a regular cadence, knowing what kind of feedback each individual is best at giving. A copy editor looks for grammatical errors or factual errors, whereas, like, your arts editor might think about the entire structure or the story itself. So trying to think about, like, who on your team can give the best feedback for this certain thing and make that structure clear. So then when mistakes are made, it's shown to be made in the past. Like, other people on your team have made those same mistakes and you've learned from them, and it's just kind of out there in the public of your team.
Yeah, I think you're tapping on something there that's also really important. I think a lot of really good teams or effective teams are made up of spiky people. And what I mean by spiky, like, if you are looking at your set of skills as a circle, you probably got 1 or 2 that jut out, like, really good at this. And then you probably have some that are like bad, like antithetical to success. Like, if you put me on front end, like, you're gonna destroy the whole. Okay, cool. We're not gonna do that. So you combine a team of these spiky people and understand where people's strengths are and play to those strengths and allow those people to help guide. Like, you are the person. You're the SME. You're the subject matter expert on this. Come and give us feedback in such a way that allows for us all to make better decisions. I think also recognizing, again, organizing the structure of your team so that people know who has expertise. Because when I have a question, who do I need to go to quickest? Because otherwise I throw it up on a message board and it's like, I don't know, somebody on Stack Overflow might have it, but like, if there's a guy or a gal here, like, why am I not talking to that person, and why was that information not made readily available to me from the jump if I'm actually supposed to be collaborating with this team? So you can advocate for yourselves in that way too. Say, hey, I'm not seeing a clear infrastructure here, chart any sort of path to get my questions answered. How have you all supported that in the past? Because, you know, that's where success is going to be, in understanding who the stakeholders are, even in your own environment. I think there's just too many blind spots that you can run into, like trapdoors in the code even. Like, well, yeah, everybody knows that. Like, clearly not. Like,
You know, have you ever taken a survey before, and it's a super wide open question, and they give you 4 possible choices, and it's supposed to be a scale. They don't give you the middle choice. Those kinds of surveys drive me nuts. They drive me crazy. It's like, you have to choose. Do you strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree? There's no middle ground, because I want to choose the 5. Like, in many cases, it's some sort of nuance. Okay, I'm going to do that to you. So, because it drives me nuts. So there we go. Is innovation and creativity, you only get one of the 2 options. There's no middle ground. I'll cut you off. Okay? You only get one of the 2. Is it technical or artistic? Only one of the 2. Don't buck the system. One of the 2.
I'm just going to say artistic.
I hate these kinds of surveys.
Innovation and creativity.
Artistic
Artistic or technical?
Technical.
I mean, I could say why I think it's artistic.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah, I think it's artistic because you know, you have to think about like an innovative child. Like, they don't have technical skill. Like, it's about like, what do you see as possible, or even like the best artists want to get to a place where they forget everything and go back to that novel lens where I can just create sort of through a subconscious. Or I think about a time when great innovation was happening, like during the Renaissance, and you have architects and artists and mathematicians and philosophers coming together to build mobile scaffolding for the first time, and then erect, you know, that golden dome that is still there to this day. All that in service of adding beauty to the world. We got new infrastructural tools. We got something that will last. And so, again, I think it's artistic. I think it takes that sort of whimsy almost to just like, what if I look at it like this way? I don't know. There's a technical craftspersonship to that, but
Yeah. I know. I'm going to give you an answer. You're just going to be like, that's not the
not what I said.
Because I think it also depends on the person, of who you're applying this to. Because I think historically, default, we think of artistic as like flowy and whimsical, and just like, what is that? Left brain? Is that what? Right? And it's just like,
Right.
It's so creative. And technical, or artistic, or like blah 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 blah. Technical, and is more like rigid, follows the rules. Like, that's kind of what we think of, right? Because I remember when I first started coding. When I went to Prime, and when I first started doing it, my mom said to me, and she's gonna hate that I'm telling everybody that she said this, but she's like, "Oh, I never thought you had the brain for that." she's like, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You're just more like creative and artistic, and there's so much creativity and artisticness that goes into writing code. And honestly, right now, a whole lot of my creative outlets are kind of technical. Like I have a floor loom and I weave and I use patterns and it's very binary, and but those technical boundaries and that kind of rigidity allows me to really be creative with the way that I go about it. And I like sewing and I use patterns and I like following these instructions to understand the foundation of it so then I can grow upon it and use a little bit more like whimsy and just like, oh, what if I did this? But I need this technical understanding to allow me to be artistic and creative and innovative with it. I need this technical foundation to allow me to kind of build upon that and then be creative. Because sometimes I don't have a plan, I have no background, and I'll like sit down at the piano and I'm just like, I'm just gonna be creative. And then I sit there and I'm just like, merp. And then I'm just like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, there's so many possibilities. I have no idea what to do right now. Should I play some blues? Should I try to like recreate a song I heard? Should I read sheet music? Like, what should I do? I don't know what to do. So for me, it is kind of depends on the person, because sometimes I think the whimsical, like flowy, no rules is a great way to approach innovation and creativity. And I think sometimes more of a technical approach can spark innovation and creativity.
Michael, I want to get your opinion, then I have one more question.
Okay. I'm going to say artistic because that is the job. It's hard to.
Sorry.
It's really hard not to say, but yes, it's gray area. But I would just like to try to expand the definition of artistry, where we think normally about the individual, the genius, who is just presenting their ideas as fact. But I like to think of artistry as a group, where that friction that we talked about comes from that collaboration between certain members. And then, yes, exactly, I think boundaries are crucial to artistry. And whether that's technical, I'm going to say no at this point. But yeah, I think I'll lean artistry at this point.
Great. So my last question for you is this. The undercurrent of what I think I've heard from the three of you is that innovation and creativity, in terms of designing the future, requires constraint. Okay, there is constraint within the context of that innovation. So in what way do you put personal constraints in place? Not your teams, not your businesses, but how do you cultivate personal constraint? And how does that equip you to be successful?
I have to. You have to excuse me on the name, but there's a woman. I believe her name is Elizabeth H. Potentially, I'll have to look that up, follow it up. But she wrote a book on exploratory testing, and in that book, she just talks about using charters or spikes, even really, to just define like, all right, we know that the map has a little bit of a gray area here. Here are the tools that I'm going to use. I got some rope, I got some dynamite, and I got a pickaxe, and I got 4 days to figure out if there's a way across this crevasse. I have a hypothesis. I think there's X, Y, Z. You get there, you realize that's not the case. I can now bring that information back before I actually start trying to dig a tunnel by hand through the mountain by myself, and let the team know, like, hey, we thought it was X, it's really Y and Z. So yeah, just those constraints, just really simple constraints like, hey, you got 2 hours, you're gonna use Chat GPT, Dash, notes, and then one other thing to try and get to the bottom of this specific problem. And if you can't, you come back and you tell the team and you say, hey, I came up for air, I need help, I can't figure this thing out, or this is what I discovered while I was on the ground. It's just really simple constraints.
So simplicity, if I may. Okay.
Simplicity.
I like deadlines, and it's really important to me to tell that deadline to another person, so then I am beholden to that, because as an individual, if I were given a week to work on a project, I would work that full week, and then the weekend after, and then the week after that, because I just need that other person to hold me accountable. So that's kind of the constraint that I usually put on myself.
Yeah, so the constraint of simplicity, accountability, what would be yours?
Yeah, and so even though you kind of framed it as like a personal constraint, I think for me, it's the context in which I live. And I'm reminded of a quote, you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Right? We live within the world that has been created by others, and the world in which we have created for ourselves. We exist in the company that we work for or the company that we own. We exist in the team that we're working for. We exist within the realm that our client has created. And so I think for me, my constraint comes from the context in which I'm existing. And there's so much that informs that. It's like, how much energy do I have to expend today? How much energy, where's my team at in their energy levels? What are the expectations of the client? What languages are we working on? What meetings do I have today? How many people are going to be using this app? That can totally change the way that you approach how you're solving problems and what edge cases you are addressing. It can be really, you can just spiral and just go through all the edge cases, and then you're like, okay, this is a Medicaid reporting system that a representative from each state is going to be using. So we're going to have a usage of about 50 people. So we don't need to think of every single edge case. We can kind of wrap that up and save that for customer support. So just existing within the context, I think, being aware of all of that can be really helpful.
Well, thank you. You know, the coconut tree comment made me think about a kid's book. I have an 18-month-old and I'm 3-month-old at the house. And the one of the constraints there that I've tried to adopt a discipline of sorts. In the book, the alphabet climbs a coconut tree. And eventually the coconut tree falls over and the whole alphabet falls out, and then mom and dad and aunties come over and, you know, help them. And then they all go to bed, and then A gets back up and starts to climb the coconut tree. And there's kind of a lesson in that, of which always get back up and keep climbing until you reach the goal that you're actually after. So thanks for the coconut tree reference,
Hey,
and we
we
can
didn't
learn
even
lots
work
of
on
things
that.
from kids' books. I'm 3 minutes over. I'm so sorry. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Give them a round of applause.
Thank you for moderating.